Warm welcome to people who are online today. Thank you very much for spending your morning with us on this lovely Friday morning here in BC. We'll just do our little bit of a regular introduction and just get ourselves settled, but hopefully you're in the right room with psychosocial rehabilitation advanced practice. And so just as college employees, myself and Manny and Jen, we'd like to acknowledge the Coquitlam and Pequot First Nations, as well as all Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territory we live, learn, play, and work. And I think we would be remiss in not acknowledging the very sad news of this last time, where we have learned tragic news from Kamloops. And as your PSR BC support people, we encourage you to reach out to the loved ones you have in your life, to others, to find the support that you need. And I know for many of us, it's a really sad a sad time, and provides opportunity for reflection and really an understanding that it's not enough to say that it's sad, but that each of us need to take action. Each of us need to consider what are these learnings in our lives and how we are able to support our brothers and sisters and each other as well as we can. So for those of you who are just really experiencing a deep sadness and maybe anger and many other feelings, we just want to reach out and we want to encourage our collective health and well-being. So we just want to start with that. Um, and as you know, PSR Advanced Practice, we're here really, and our focus is about education and about providing education and support for people delivering and receiving services across the province. We are very grateful to the Ministry of Health for our original funding, and we're also very grateful to Fraser Health Authority, who recently provided additional funding. These series of webinars, I believe we're on 72 webinars today. And so if you are in the community out there and you have things to share with us, please reach out, please let us know, either in the evaluation or just send us an email, as well, I think. And so we'd love to hear from you if, you have things to share, or maybe people in the community doing outstanding things. And there are many of us doing outstanding things out there. So let us know. At the end of the presentation, you'll receive an evaluation. I have to share this with a caveat that I fooled with it for about an hour this morning. It's a new platform for Qualtrics, and I was not able to change the first title on that. I am sorry about that, but I have left in this final slide a link to the evaluation. So we look forward to hearing what you think is good and rotten, and how we can improve, and how you might wish to contribute to our learning. We do also want to let you know that our dear colleague Hazel Meredith will present with a team on June 25, and she's going to talk about transitional discharge model from the island. And I heard a little bit about this, and it is very rocking stuff, I have to say. As always, they're innovative and really providing support for individuals who are living with mental health and substance use issues, and their loved ones. So we look forward to that. I think that's going to be really good. Today, we have two amazing people with us, one of whom you know very well. But the first person is Jonathan, so he's with us. He asked me to please let you know that he's publishing this from his rooftop. There's a little renovation going on in his building, so it got a little noisy. So did want me to let you know that there might be the intermittent noise, but we'll do our best to mitigate that as we possibly can. So Jonathan is this project manager for this collaborative project alongside the British Columbia Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions to create a low barrier, provincially accredited, that's hard to say, peer support worker training curriculum informed by direct consultation, collaboration, and co-creation with workers with lived and living experience. And I think this notion of co-creation it's the big buzzword, I think, in all of our projects these days, for good reason. I think we're really being called on to include people who will be impacted by the services we're developing. So that's really super good to hear. I'm really excited to hear these details. Jonathan spent a decade working in harm reduction in Vancouver's downtown east side, including as the first manager of two North American pioneering overdose prevention sites, where he was the co-creator of Street degree peer worker training program. So we welcome Jonathan from his lovely rooftop, and we will just also share, whoopsie daisies, so sorry, dear Jenn, who you know very well. So we are very fortunate to have Jenn's expertise on this team. We're very grateful. And she wrote this curriculum, which is amazing. She's the writer, developer for BC Support curriculum. She's worked in community mental health since the mid-90s, managed a peer support program within Fraser Health Authority for 15 years, and prior to launching her own business called Luminate Wellness in early 2015. She brought the Wellness Recovery Action Planning to Western Canada in 2002, and we're still reaping the benefits of that work. We thank her for that. She creates curriculum and facilitates workshops and trainings to both service providers and people receiving services within the mental health substance use system, and as well to the general public. Jenn is also coordinator with us here at BC Advanced Practice with dear Manny, Ebba, and myself. So welcome to everybody. I'm just going to flash up this evaluation with that note that I messed up on the introduction part. So with that, I'm going to pass you over to Jonathan, and Jonathan will take it away from his roof. Yeah.
Great. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm really pleased to be here today. Yeah, just to let you know, ask for your patience with some of the ambient sound that's happening in behind me. But one of the core values, of course, of working from a place of lived experience is being agile and adapting to new environments. And so I'm doing that today. My pronouns are he, him. And I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you today on the lands of the unceded lands of the Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish. And I would also like to back that up with both a personal and a professional commitment to holding all levels of government accountable to enforcing the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Report. We here at BC Campus have done a lot of work in the last week to think about, as Regina talked about, those concrete actions. And that's one of the things that we're doing. And also as a family, we've been writing letters to our MPs as well, which has been a great process. And so I really thank for the introduction there. One thing that I should mention, of course, that's probably important is that I do this work from a place of lived experience with substance use disorder. It's probably an important part to mention. And also important to mention that I'm actually the second project manager on the project. The original project manager, Corey Ranger, who is a wonderful human being, took his leave to go and set up a safe supply project in Victoria. So I've been project manager on the project for just a little over a year. Before that, I was co-chair of the substance use working group. And so what I'm going to talk about today is really about that co-creation part and about that engagement, meaningful engagement with workers with lived experience on this project and how we did that. So I will share my screen now. So one of the first things that when I joined the project that we noticed is in our materials that we were building for the website, there's a lot of stock footage of folks gathered in boardrooms, you know, drinking Starbucks and things like that. And what we wanted to do was actually set up a project to get photographs of actual peers doing actual peer work in the real world. And so that's what you see here is the See Peers photo project that we did with a photojournalist, Jesse Winters, to get photographs of peers doing work in the places they work, like overdose prevention sites. You know, we have a handful of those there. And then in the top left corner is Casey. And Casey was an incredibly important part of our project, involved from day one in every aspect of the program. Casey works for Coast Mental Health and runs a support group for voice hearers. And Casey refers to himself as a voice hearer. And Casey really was involved in every aspect of this project, including actually writing some material for our mental health module. and was incredible and a really powerful example of that level of engagement that we tried to do it every step of the way, and really get actual voices in the material itself. And so we thought that was incredibly important. So backing up a little bit, when we set up the project, we engaged in a process to create our standards of practice. And that was done with all our working group members. So at that time, we had 4 working groups, one focused on substance use, one focused on mental health, one focused on public policy, and one focused on multiple populations like Indigenous folks, neurodivergent folks. And so those working groups worked together in a series of monthly meetings to decide what that standards of practice might look like. So that was really the foundation of the work. So the quote that I have here is really one of the foundational quotes of what we tried to do in this entire process. And one of my favorite thinkers, Paulo Freire, any situation in which individuals prevent others from engaging in the process of inquiry is one of violence. Alienating human beings from their own decision making changes them into objects. And that was precisely what we wanted to avoid. And so we did not want to speak to, we wanted to speak with. And we really tried to go out of our way to make that real, not just a theory. So, for example, when it came to directly informing what the standards of practice might be, or any other component of this curriculum, we really practiced that core value of harm reduction where we met people where they were at. And so if they felt most comfortable in informing the project by meeting me for coffee and going for a walk, we would do that. If they wanted to fax us some notes, we would take those. If we wanted to have a separate conversation because someone didn't want to talk in the meeting, we would make sure that happened. And we really committed to that follow-ups and making sure that everyone found a place and found a way to have their voice and their thinking embedded in the project. So if you look here, we began the project early on by reaching out, working with Insights West to reach out to peer support workers across the province and working in every different aspect of peer support work, whether that was in the mental health field, overdose prevention, all kinds of clinics, and every place that peer work was done, and did a survey. And it was actually a really in-depth survey. If I remember correctly, the surveys were 30 pages long. We engaged with about 220 peer support workers across the province. And we used that to start building our conversation with our working groups about what the standards of practice would be. What did peers want to learn about? What were the values of peer work? What were the core components of lived experience? What made peers different? What was their unique value in the workspace? So we started there, and then we began developing our working groups. And we did a number of other consultations with Insights West, as you see there. And then there's a whole list of how often we engaged with folks with lived experience. And the important thing here to mention is, of course, that all these opportunities that you see here were fairly compensated using the BCC standards for compensation for peers. And so all the way up to including our grants for our in-community projects. So we did 7 $15,000 grants, and those are real grassroots organizations creating incredible resources that will live on the website, featuring tools for working alongside sex workers, drug user liberation tools, incredible stuff, histories of prohibition. So that was really important to us to really throughout be consulting, engaging, and paying peers for their lived experience throughout the process. And so at the beginning, once we did those workshops and we did a really in-depth literature scan and looked at everything that was available, both within the province, nationally and internationally, about peer work and the history of peer work, and used that to extract some core findings. And some of the things we discovered, of course, were, as I'm sure many folks out there know, that the word peer is a dynamic living word. It's in some regards a controversial word, and so we engage with that about, what is a peer? What does lived experience mean? We extracted some common themes about lived experience informing everyday practice. And that was an important one, that what made peer work a distinct thing, especially when you're working with clinical teams, was that lived experience and that unique relational capacity of folks with lived experience to create bonds of trust with the people they're supporting, and that folks needed to center that particular and unique piece in the work that they were doing. We extracted some core values, including self-determination, empathy and reciprocity, experiential knowledge, equity, and all those additional values. We also realized that we needed to work really hard to focus our efforts in reaching out to and including Indigenous communities, youth, LGBTQ spirit, and ethnic minorities in the work that we were doing. And so the purpose of the project, when it originated as a request with the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions, we can go into this slide here. But honestly, the reason this happened in the first place was, it wasn't so much about the sort of, box ticking component or the social justice angle or just being seen to be doing things with folks with lived experience. Government doesn't commit money to these kinds of things unless they are effective, and they have been proven to be effective in many different aspects of peer work throughout health and mental health, and so that's really the reason why this was happening. And the core structure of it was that we needed to have our project be informed and evaluated by peers, informed by Indigenous peoples, clearly recognize both in the process and in what we were producing the valuable contributions of peers in mental health and every other place that peer work is done. Incorporate the policy and practices described in the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions Pathways to Hope strategy. There's a really great line in that Pathways to Hope that I really focused a lot on, where they talk about working to ensure that when folks are accessing service or trying to access service, often folks that are victims of structural violence, that every door was the right door. And so the way we like to think of it is that if you have that lived experience and the door you knock on is another person with lived experience, they're always going to be that right door. Peers are always that right door. And so we did work to make sure that those strategies outlined in Pathways to Hope were embedded within the curriculum in the final project. So this is just another overview of the steps that we took in the project. The slide is a little maybe challenging to see, but was the beginning of the process was establishing those working groups and a technical advisory committee. The TAC in behind the project was made up of all kinds of stakeholders, folks from post-secondary institutions, government, all kinds of organizations that work to support peers like the BC CDC, and all kinds of powerful organizations. As I said before, we did the environmental scan and literature scan. We formed our expert working groups and worked to eliminate those structural power imbalances. And so what that meant was the kinds of things that I was saying before, where we really did want to make sure that every contribution was listened to and evaluated and equal. And so we really worked hard to do that. And then this is another concept that we really centered in the entire process, was the consent before content process. This is something I learned from Indigenous coworkers in other jobs that I've done. And it's exactly what it says in there, that we begin with meaningful engagement, we begin with consent before we get to content. And that meaningful engagement results in meaningful results. And so this was something that we really tried to talk to folks in our working groups all the time, that even if they only ever came to that one meeting and said that one thing, that we heard that one thing, that we worked to embed that in the learning. And not to forget the sort of revolutionary nature of this. You know, this is a big project from the provincial government that has folks with lived experience influencing, you know, a piece of government training. And that was really remarkable and really powerful. And so we work to remind folks throughout about that. This is a diagram that sort of, again, talks about that unique relational capacity of folks with lived experience, and really speaks to what we strove to illuminate and emphasize throughout the work. Our curriculum wasn't necessarily centered on service delivery, peer work. And what I mean by that, it wasn't about, you know, outlining the specific job requirements of the vast number of different jobs that peers do. It was about that beating heart of lived experience. And as it says in the center there, the unique relational capacity of peer support workers with lived and living experience to make visible the stigma that's invisible in order to eliminate it. And that allows for those bonds of trust to be formed with marginalized populations, or any other group that you're working with. And it allows that flow between the community and organizations that are offering healthcare services, so that peer worker can be that translator that's really critical sometimes, both translating for the organization, and also for the organization to the community itself, because both are important. So I wanted to show a couple of examples of some of the special tools we created that will live on our website, that were created with even more in-depth consultation with peer support workers. Our stigma mapping tool is a tool we created to show how stigma shows up in the built environment and to how we can eliminate it. So we created these 4 identities of, you know, a character with that is living with a mental health diagnosis, Indigenous character, gender diverse character, and a substance user, that would show folks the places where stigma shows up in the offices, clinics, detox, shelters, all the places where peers do work, and show ways to eliminate it. And then we also created, with one of our working group members who is autistic, a tool called Through the Autism Lens. And this was specific to their experience. We do talk more about different types of neurodiversity in the curriculum and in other places, but this one was focused on Millie's experience. But it's a really fun example of how we really went in and created some very focused, specialized tools based directly on in that engagement. For the stigma mapping, we hosted a series of really powerful meetings and heard some amazing stuff about how stigma had affected folks and those accessing services. And here's an example of one of the in-community grants that was created with this one was created by the BC CDC. And as you can see there, it's a brief history of prohibition in British Columbia. And so with these in-community tools, and there's 7 of them that will live on the website, those hopefully will work in conjunction with the 16 modules that Jenn wrote, that are the real heart of the actual training. And they will be a way to sort of provide that grassroots vision as well. We have another tool from the BC and Yukon drug war survivor group, drug liberation tool, a tool for working alongside sex workers, and really rich stuff from the front lines to bolster our training, so that there's multiple perspectives. And then this was one of the things that we extracted from the initial workshops and surveys that we did with peers across the province. Top 10 recommendations for peer engagement and consultation. And, you know, for folks out there that are coming from a post-secondary environment, we're working right now with the AAST on adapting our materials for the post-secondary environment. But these recommendations can be used anywhere and with any definition of peer. So the main things, the recommendations there are: number one, adopt a set of values and principles. It may seem obvious, but it's really important to have those up front and talk about what those are in your project. When you're working with peers, reflect on your own processes, pretty straightforward. Review the literature so that you know something about working alongside peers and are not always asking them to define their own value. Pay them properly, challenge power structures, give peers options for everything, whether that's everything from payments to transportation to how they want to provide feedback. Options, options, options always. Be flexible, be humble, seek diversity, process over outcomes, which is a really important one. I think for a lot of us, we have our own pressures, whether they're budget pressures or whatever they might be, and we get focused on outcomes. But for peers and from those coming from sometimes traumatic lived experiences, if we're not in the process with them, that the whole thing can feel unsafe. And so we want to center that process. Another word for that is conversation or relationship. So relationships over outcomes is another way of thinking about that. And then the classic, meeting people where they're at, is critically important to this. And this number 736, that's about the number of pages of content we created for this project. The website will be live in early to mid-July. We're having a public launch. And I will make sure to share that with everyone once that's the invitation to that, where we will take folks on a guided tour of the project. But that's an incredible amount of content. A big chunk of that is Jenn. So an absolute kudos to the work that Jenn did. It was pretty heroic stuff. So a lot of content there. As pages of published online content created with the direct input of folks with lived and living experience. And then just ending up my portion of the presentation with another quote that we heard from a peer support worker early on. I love this quote: "Lived experience in the service of hope is the greatest expertise that humans have." Couldn't agree more with that. And one of the things that I really enjoyed was inserting those quotes from peers throughout our modules. And because they really are powerful quotes. So we have quotes that are important from expertise, from, clinicians, from, psychiatrists, and that stuff is critically important, of course, but adding in those real peer voices with quotes like this. Another one that appears, I believe, in the employer's course is, "As peers, we've been there, but we know a way out," is another powerful quote that is in our material, and that we hope folks will live by those quotes and understand them and use them in the work that they do. And so that is my part of the presentation. Again, I hope it wasn't too noisy out here. I can't thank everyone enough for attending today, and I hope it was useful. And now I will pass it on to Jenn.
Okay. There we go. Okay, can you see me? Yeah? Okay. Good. Well, thank you, Jonathan. I have to say, this project has been one of the most amazing projects I've ever been a part of in my life, and also one of the hardest. And it's been just such a gift to get to be a part of this and it was really cool to hear you, Jonathan, just talk about all the process. Now that we're finally here and we're talking about it, we're ready to launch, it just feels so exciting. And I just feel so glad that I got to be a part of this. So before we start, I see a lot of names that I recognize. And I'm curious if you feel comfortable typing in the chat where you're from. I'd love to see like what city, what province you're from. If you feel comfortable typing that in, I'd love to see who's here. And then I'll start going. Victoria, Grand Forks, New West, Kelowna, Sydney, Nova Scotia. Wow, my mom's from there. Okay, Vancouver, Nelson. Wow, look at all this. Edmonton, of course. There we go. This is great. Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to share with you is more of the content. So Jonathan spoke about the process and how the process worked as far as not the behind the scenes, the driving force behind the training. And I was the behind the scenes. I took that information and then put it all into a format that is the training that we're gonna release. So the parts really worked well together, and I worked a lot with Jonathan and Corey, and they supported me when I was, figuring out how to write something and how to really grasp the language in the right way so that we were honoring to all the people involved. So the editing process of some of it was tough because so many people weighed in. So I can assure you that we have so many voices that weighed into the content, because we really worked hard to create that space for people to weigh in and contribute. So the way it worked is we first came up with the first document, which looks like this. It's a standards of practice document. So it's an overview of currently kind of what peer support services are in BC, some recommendations of how we would like it to be, because maybe in some places it's not exactly the way we would like it yet. Some parts of BC are further ahead than others. So it was kind of like our dream of where we would like to see peer support in the province. And then it also included some core values, which I will talk more about in a bit, and then standards of practice. That was a really important component of this. We wanted to create standards that then organizations in BC could use if you want within your workplaces. You could use the standards of practice to support creating work descriptions or role clarification, all that kind of stuff. That's why that's in there. So it's a great resource for organizations and for peers who are just looking to improve their work. So and then we created a curriculum guide, which was basically a very large overview of all of the modules. So we came up with 16 different modules, and I'll give you like an overview of all of them. So the curriculum guide, which we will offer on the website when it's up and running, the curriculum guide is a overview of all those 16 modules. So some of the main points, including learning objectives and things like that. So, and then from there, in October, we started developing out those modules. So each module went from like being an overview to an actual module where there's learning and reflection questions and all that involved. So we then took those modules and typed out. They ranged between I would say 30 pages and 50 pages, and we inputted them into the website, so that now it's an online training that will be launched that people can go on to and pick which module you want to do. And all of that content will be available online for people to do independently. And I'll tell you more about that as we go on. But maybe I will share my screen now. Okay. Sorry. I'm just Manny or someone, can you change the video so that you only see my screen and not everyone else, just for the recording, because it'll be hard to see all the slides. Okay, so this is the these are the slides. These are the core values. So the core values, like Jonathan said, we had done a survey of peers in the area to find out what they thought a good peer support worker was. So we had a list of positive attributes of a peer support worker. So, and it described the different attributes. And then I took that, and then, you know, with support from other people, we created what we thought were the core values of peer support in BC. And all of this is woven through the whole training. So I'll just go over them quickly. And this design is just so beautiful. It's we hired Drawing Change, and Sam Brad did this design. So I think it's great. And I think it's something that you can print and put up on your wall if you have a peer support office or whatever. It's just really beautiful. Okay, so the top value is hope and wholeness for all. The belief that hope, you know, people can and will experience well-being, wholeness. And when we say the word wholeness, we mean, it doesn't mean perfection. Wholeness means just being comfortable in your own skin, just being in a state of wholeness. But it doesn't mean, it means that we still have, you know, imperfections. That's part of being human, but we can still feel whole and still have things that we're working on. And I think that's a really important thing in this work, that we acknowledge that it's a journey for most of us. You know, we have cycles, we have times that are harder and easier, and we wanted to acknowledge that. Acknowledgement is another core value, and basically that is the whole idea that people just want to know and be known, be validated. So in our work, we want to just make an effort to really acknowledge the full person, and whether that's, you know, when someone's grieving or just in regular everyday life, that we acknowledge the person, because it's so easy that we can get into these situations where we're with people, but we don't really see them and we don't really try to listen. We're so quick to give advice. We're so quick to do other things. But this is really about just showing up and trying to see the person, without trying to fix or save them. Mutuality, this is like the big piece that is different than other more clinical programs, is peer support is all about mutuality. So because it's different than other clinical programs, it's going to look different than other programs within our mental health substance use systems. So there's a lot more back and forth, a lot more, we're on the same level playing field, a lot more of that. So the peer relationship, I'm going to just read what it says about that. The peer relationship is mutual and reciprocal. So peer support breaks down hierarchies. The peer support worker and the peer equally co-create the relationship, and both participate in boundary creation. So it's not like there's a set, these are the boundaries. It's like together we get to sit down and figure out what this relationship is going to look like. And if I'm the peer support worker, I get to be a part of that. So it's about mutual. So we can go, hey, we both want to get in shape. Let's together go and work out during our times and support each other through that. So it's a little different than other clinical type work. And then the next one is strength-based. So it's more motivating to move towards something than away from it, than away from a problem. So we intentionally build on already existing strengths, and we thoughtfully and purposefully move in the direction of flourishing rather than only responding to pain and oppression. So this one is huge, and I've seen in my work, lots of times in my work before I left and started my own business, I saw a lot of the work was focused a lot on fixing a problem. So I get referrals that would come in sometimes, and it would say, the purpose of this relationship is to decrease isolation. And that was something I saw quite often show up. So when we say strength-based, it's about looking at what are the things that people are bringing to the table. What are their strengths? What are not just resources, but actual strengths within. And then let's work on building that instead of moving away from something. So if decreasing isolation is a goal, let's find a way to say that in a way that's motivating. I want to get involved in the community. I want to take a class or something, so that it's much more motivating versus being stuck in a problem. Self-determination is such a huge one. And self-determination is about the right to make a decision and the freedom from coercion. So we support the facilitation and creation of an environment where people can feel free to tap into their inner motivation. So peer support workers don't fix or save. We acknowledge and hold space for resilience and inner wisdom. So this one is huge. And it really informs everything we do, that everything we do and all of the modules will reflect self-determination. It's so huge. So we don't go in to fix or save. We don't give advice. That's not what we're there for. We're there to create an ecology where people can learn to tap into their own wisdom. And obviously there are times and places where people have more access to that than others. If someone's in a psych unit or something like that, they're going to have less opportunity for self-determination than someone who's living in the community. However, there's always opportunity for choice, and there's always opportunity to support people to tap into their own inner wisdom and avoid advice giving. So that's an important one. And then respect, dignity, and equity. This belief is that all human beings have intrinsic value. Peer support workers acknowledge that deep worth by practicing cultural humility and sensitivity, serving with a trauma-informed approach, offering generosity of assumption in communication and conflict. We spend a bit of time talking about conflict in the training. Mindfully addressing personal biases. And peer support is about meeting people where they are at and serving others with a knowledge of equity. And then belonging and community is another one. And that's really just about how all of us as human beings, we all have a desire to belong and be a part of community. And sometimes our systems don't always encourage that sense of belonging. People can end up feeling like they're a number in a system. So peer support is really about that connection to other people, that bridge to connecting within the larger community, and about trying to break down some of the barriers that get in the way of that sense of belonging. So that one's really important. And curiosity is a really important one too. And it's one that maybe you haven't seen in a set of values before, but it's about being intentional about curiosity and in how curiosity and inquiry can support growth, learning, and engagement. So it's just such an important piece of the work that we do, that we get curious about when things come up within me. When I start to notice I have biases, I want to get curious about that. Why do I have this bias? Why is this affecting my work? Why is this showing up? So I want to get curious about that within me. And then I want to be curious about the other person and stop assuming that I know what they need or what their story is. I want to with respect, and not with like asking 20 questions or interrogating someone. I want to be curious and ask them what what's happening for them, and hear their voice, and look to find their voice in the whole thing. Curiosity really supports us to get out of advice giving. So when we get curious, instead of assuming that we know an answer, it keeps us out of giving advice. And it also really supports self-determination. When we get curious about things, then we are more apt to support someone in their self-determination versus assuming that we know what's going on. So it supports more of a level playing field. So those are the core values, and they show up throughout the whole training. Sorry. So the standards of practice, we have 5 different standards, and then each of these has about 5 different things underneath it, but I don't have time to go over all of it. But the first one is peer specialized proficiencies, and that looks at, basically how people do their jobs. So this is for people who are employed. So this is how people do their job, like they demonstrate. The first one, I'll just read the first one. Demonstrates understanding that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to recovery and wholeness. Each person needs to discover what goals, values, and beliefs work for them. So peer support workers recognize that others' path may be different than their own. So that's the first one. And then the second one is principles of supporting wellness, wholeness, recovery, and social belonging. And the first one is actively creates and engages in self-care that supports their own well-being, because we can't really support other people if we're not taking care of ourselves too. So, and then once we have learned to take care of ourselves and support ourselves to prevent from burning out, say, it really supports us in our work. So, and C is diversity, inclusion, and equity. Is aware of and actively reflects on their own set of values and beliefs. And then there's 5 others besides that. And then D is facilitating communication and connection. And this one includes things like demonstrates an understanding of and sensitivity towards the effect of personal communication style on others. And then the last one, E, is collaboration and ethical practice. So this one's really about how we collaborate with other teams, with other service providers, and things like that. So that's the standards of practice. It's definitely there's more to it in the actual standards of practice guide, which I think we can share this with you on our website after, if you're interested in seeing it. One of the things that we really wanted to do in this training was look at the word recovery. Recovery is a word sometimes that not everyone resonates with, especially because this training was very, sometimes our services can be very separate between mental health and substance use. And this was a really coming together of both. And sometimes the word recovery, brings up things in the substance use side. So we wanted to really be, we needed to use the word, but we also wanted to be sensitive about like re-meaning it. So this is what we came up with. Recovery is the process of building me, and then self-determination and personal responsibility is a piece, hope is a piece, resilience, having a sense of who I am, connection, meaning and purpose, and awareness of my humanity. And we know that recovery is not the absence of pain, struggle, or setbacks. I am a complex human being, and it's okay if I mess up. Everybody messes up. And recovery is not linear. It's not a destination. It's an explorative voyage. So that's how we define that. And we wanted to really highlight in the training that recovery doesn't mean the absence of pain, struggle, or setbacks, that there's not an all or nothing approach with anything. So we wanted to address that, and because an all or nothing approach removes the capacity for offering self-compassion and treating oneself with kindness and tenderness is essential to recovery. And peer support is always grounded in a person-centered approach. It's essential that all peer support services do not begin with the assumption of a problem, but rather the possibility of a transformative benefit of the relationship. So the training, like Jonathan said, we didn't take an approach with this because it's very broad. The amount of people that could use this training was broad because it could be used in substance use and mental health, in organizations, also possibly workplaces and post-secondary schools. So we didn't get into work type, like job description type training. People who go through this training will still need to get special training, like say if they work in a inpatient unit, they'll have to get training about what to do in that specific environment. So the approach that we took with this training is really about connection. It's about the relationship. It's about what's different about peer support versus other more clinical roles, and kind of that more foundational grounding knowledge, and less about like specifics. We didn't really get into that. I like this quote: "A peer is an equal, someone with whom someone shares demographic or social similarities. Support expresses the kind of deeply felt empathy, encouragement, and assistance that people with shared experiences can offer one another within a reciprocal relationship." And I know that piece, the reciprocal relationship, can be really tricky, because what we're doing with peer support is we're putting this program that is so different than everything else within the system, and we're putting it in a system that works a certain way. So in a way, is really counterculture, the way peer support is compared to some other, like the way a nurse works, or a social worker, or an OT. Like it's very it's a different role. So we're putting something that's counterculture in an environment that is different, and it can be tough sometimes for peers when they're getting sucked into a more clinical way of being. But we have different ways of approaching boundaries in peer support, and different types. It's really focused on the relationship versus other pieces that other clinicians would have and be responsible for. When a system can only see roles from a hierarchical perspective, they can tend to take a tokenistic approach to peer support. And when peer support is embedded in the system in a tokenistic way, it never really achieves the full benefit of having peer support as a unique resource within teams. So peer support workers who are in a tokenized position can see their roles as less than, instead of as an essential, unique contribution towards supporting someone's journey towards greater wholeness. So yeah, it's almost like one piece of the training I talked about the difference, how this is different than other types of roles within the system, is kind of like it's a paradigm shift. It's a different way of looking at something. So in a way, remember those magic puzzles that were big in the 90s and early 2000s, that you'd stare at it and then an image would come out? I don't know if you all know that, what I'm talking about, but in a way, it's like I'm talking about a paradigm shift like that. Is like, we can't compare peer support to other things because it's so different, and we need to learn to see it with different eyes, because the purpose is different, and the goal is about connection, fully about connection and relationship. So I don't have a ton of time, but I wanted to go through each of the modules so you could be aware of what is in the training. And then I'll talk a little bit, or Jonathan and I can talk a little bit about what it is going to look like and how people can access it. So there's 16 modules, and I'm going to go through each of them quickly. So the first module is called the Foundations, and this one is really just foundational to everything in the training. So we cover topics like sitting with discomfort. It's, this training is, it's not easy. It's not easy. There's really challenging things in it. So a lot of times people will go through it and there's some discomfort, like, ooh, I'm feeling like some of the things that I've really, that are strongly held beliefs, I'm feeling them challenged, or I'm just feeling uncomfortable about being in this situation of growth. So we talk in that module about how growth actually can't happen unless we feel discomfort. So discomfort is actually a really important piece of growth, but we have to know where the line is. So it's about kind of figuring out where your line is and what's okay, and to just push a little past your comfort zone so that you can really start to engage with the material. And then we talk about the interconnection. Interconnection is a huge piece of this training. We tend to live in a society that's very hyper individualistic, which means like very focused on self. And even our systems are focused on self. There's not a lot of interconnection that happens within this. So we talk about how we're each very interconnected, and it's very, this comes a lot from Indigenous teachings too, about the interconnection between us and other people and the earth and all that, and just how we wanted the training to have that mindset of we're all interconnected. Empathy is a big piece of everything we do, and compassion. So we talk about that. We talk about the whole idea of sitting with uncertainty. Uncertainty is something we all like run from. It's really hard for us to sit with uncertainty, yet we are faced with uncertainty every day. This whole season of COVID has been full of uncertainty, and people have struggled so much sitting with uncertainty. So we wanted to talk about, just call that out and talk about what is uncertainty and why are we so averse to it? And then how do we build resilience to uncertainty? How do we create practices that support us to face uncertainty and feel more resilient? And then we talk about hope as well. And then the second module is an overview of peer support and wholeness. So we look at the paradigm shift from clinical work to peer support work. We cover a basic history of peer support and how peer support evolved. I've been doing a lot of trainings, and it's interesting that a lot of peer support workers don't always know about how they fit within the movement, because peer support is actually a movement that was birthed out of some mistreatment that people had received. So the movement kind of started in the 60s, 70s, kind of around the time of the civil rights movement. And that launched like the consumer survivor movement, which birthed peer support. So I think it's really important that people understand that they are a part of something that's so much bigger. And I think that actually adds to the inspiration. And then when things get tough in our own little corner of the world, we know that we're a part of something bigger. And I think that's really important for peer support workers, that they know that they're a part of that. And then we also talked about learned helplessness, which is something that can happen when people are they're conditioned to feel like they can't change anything. So they don't, people who are experiencing learned helplessness can struggle with making changes in their life. And if a peer support worker ends up working with someone who is feeling that way, it can be tough to work with someone who doesn't seem like they want to make change. So we wanted to address that in the training and talk about how to support someone and who's in that position, and have empathy and understanding for that. Number 3, the third module is self-determination. Again, this is a beautiful drawing by Sam. Self-determination is the belief that most meaningful change comes from our intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. Extrinsic comes from without. So the goal towards, say, making more money or having approval, all of that is extrinsic. And we know that change only ever happens when it comes from within. So it has to be motivated. We have to be motivated from within to make a change. Yet our systems don't always create the ecology to support that internal intrinsic motivations. We look at things like self-determination theory, like what is needed in our environment to create an opportunity for people to access their self-determination. They need to have connectedness, relatedness. They need to have autonomy and choice in whatever capacity they can have at that moment. And they need to have skills and to be learning and learning skills and mastery. And those are important components of that. So we look at that in that module, and we also look at how do we steer away from advice giving, because one thing that can happen within peer support is people can over-relate. So peer support is fabulous because we come to it with this lived experience. But my personal lived experience is going to be different than someone else's. So we need to realize that everyone comes to the table with their own experience, their own worldview, their own knowledge of what works for them, because we're all experts on ourselves. So how do we support someone from a place of lived experience and mutuality without over relating and giving advice based on my experience and not taking the time to really see who you are and how you're different than me, and what's right for me might not be right for you. So we want to avoid that advice giving. These are some quotes that I personally love. This one comes from Parker J. Palmer. When you speak to me about your deepest questions, you do not want to be fixed or saved. You want to be seen and heard and have your truth acknowledged and honored. And I feel like that speaks to self-determination. And Ellen Langer, who wrote books about mindfulness, she says, helping feels good to the helper, but over time it may make the helped feel incompetent. So in peer support, we don't use the language of helping. We talk about supporting, coming alongside someone versus helping. And this quote is by Stephen Pocklington, who was a mentor of mine. And he said, near enemies can be harder to see than far enemies. So the far enemy of self-determination is coercion, but the near enemy of self-determination is benevolent advice. So, and that's one I can tell you, I've done a few trainings, and that is one that we probably spend the most time on, is like, why do we want to avoid advice giving, and what do we do instead? How do we ask questions and use curiosity to support someone to find their own inner wisdom versus us telling them what we think is right for us, for them, right? So that, we spend a lot of time on that in the training. The fourth module it's big, categories and containers and unpacking our biases. One thing that has always been a struggle for me is when organizations say in their core values that we want to be non-judgmental, that we're going to choose to be non-judgmental. And it's actually impossible to be non-judgmental. So by saying we're going to be non-judgmental, we can be more judgmental because we're not aware that we're judging. So in this module, we're unpacking like almost some of the neuroscience behind why we judge. Like, we're wired to judge, we're wired to categorize information that comes our way, and that creates the infrastructure in our brains to judge. And we have to judge on a daily basis as we approach all the stimulus that comes our way. We have to assess and categorize things so that we can make sense of life. And I think we need to realize that and not have shame attached to judging, so that we can also look at our worldview, our biases, what are all the things that make me me? What are all the things that I have put in my brain? What are all the things that I've read and watched and the way I was like raised that actually impact the way I see the world? So I want to be aware of that, so that when I'm working with someone who's different than me, I can acknowledge my bias, my worldview, and choose to shut that off as much as I can, and choose to hear them and understand that they're coming from life in a different way because they've had different experiences. So this module is all about that. It's all about looking at how we can work with our explicit, like our noticeable biases, and also the implicit ones. How can we start working with those bits, which is a big module. And module 5 is cultural humility. Culture is inextricably connected to belonging. And in this module, we look at the importance of culture in our overall wellness, how we all have culture. We all have a piece of culture. We all, it's important to all human beings. um, and how we can approach different cultures, cultures that are different than our own, with a spirit of humility. And in that module, we also look at specifics around Indigenous culture and some of the harm that was done, and the truth and reconciliation, uh, you know, all of that. So it's also a big module, but we also wanted to start with, this is me and my culture, so that I understand the importance of culture for other people, because I can look at my own. And then the sixth one is boundaries and what it means to co-create them. So because, like I said, relationships are different in peer support than clinical work, more clinical work. So boundaries are going to look different. So basically, this is clarity about what's okay and what's not okay in a relationship, and that creates connection. So in this module, we'll look at what co-creation of boundaries is, and how the mutuality of peer support may make boundaries look different than they might look in clinical work. Like, for example, we might encourage people, on the first time you meet, let's talk about what works for each of us. When's a good time to connect? What works? What's a good communication? How do we want to communicate? Do we want to use phones or texts, or what else? Where do we want to meet? Where's a safe place to meet? Where's not a safe place to meet? All of that stuff we get to do together. Number 7, and we also look at the difference between boundaries and ethics, and how that's different. And then module 7 is about connection and communication. So it's about how relationship is at the core of peer support. And in this module, we unpack the importance of intentional communication through deep listening, strengthening our deep listening skills, sharing our story, cultivating compassion, and transforming conflict. Conflict doesn't have to be a thing that's such a bad thing, because when we experience conflict, it can be, if we look at it right, it can be an opportunity to grow and learn. So what does that look like, and how can we change maybe some of the fear we have around conflict? Also another thing we talk about in that module is connection and disconnection. So, how in relationships, sometimes you have this connection and then something happens and it creates a disconnect. And what do we do to support the reconnection? And that comes from Sharing Mead's intentional peer support work. And module 8 is healing-centered connections, principles in trauma-informed care. We just felt like a module all about that was really important. So a large number of people that we serve have trauma in their background. So in this module, we look at what trauma is. We look at systemic trauma, because a lot of the people we work with experience systemic trauma, where things aren't as simple as it looks. Well, maybe someone is struggling with something, but like, what are all the systems underneath that have perpetuated that trauma? And not that we can fix it, but we want to be aware of how that's there, and how we can, work with people who come to the table with that type of trauma. We want to look at how trauma impacts the nervous system, and then we cover principles of trauma-informed care. So what do we need to do in our work to make sure we don't re-traumatize people? That's a big module too. And then module 9 is the social determinants of health. We want to look at how inequitable and unjust societal issues greatly impact a person's access to healthcare, and in turn their overall well-being. So in this module, we look at how, especially because peer support is countercultural by nature, and there's a lot of people who are involved in peer support take an activist role in looking at changing systems. So we look at that piece, and there's an advocacy piece of this module. And then module 10 is supporting someone who's grieving. So lots of our society doesn't necessarily do a great job of educating the general public on how to support someone who's grieving. So we look at, in this module, the importance of acknowledgement, bearing witness to someone else's pain, and how essential it is to avoid platitudes and stop attempting to fix something that can't be fixed. So we look at things like ambiguous loss, like what it looks like when there's not necessarily closure to a loss, and it can be things not just death, but just other things that we experience loss, like having a mental health diagnosis can be a sense of loss and grief. So we want to look at those things. And again, it goes back to the uncertainty piece and how do we support ourselves to build up some tolerance to uncertainty. So there's some of that in there. But the big piece of this module is about just how to bear witness, how to sit beside someone who's in pain and without trying to fix them. And that's a big one. Module 11 is substance use and peer support. There's many layers of complexity around substance use. And in this module, we dig into some of the complexities through exploring harm reduction and the history of prohibition, the war on drugs and the criminalization of those who use drugs, and dehumanization that people who use substances are faced with. So that is a big one. The dehumanization is a big piece of that. So, and then module 12 is mental health and supporting those in crisis. So setbacks come with a journey of recovery. In this module, we explore some basics about mental health and supporting someone through crisis. Just to clarify again, we don't go into details about like there's this diagnosis and these medications. We don't get into that clinical piece. That's not the purpose of this module. This module, and it says right in there, you need to look to your employer. If you're an employed peer support worker, you need to look to your employer for guidelines and policies around how to support someone who's in the midst of crisis. So there's too many different scenarios that we weren't able to account for. Goal planning is module 13. So often peer support includes goal planning. I know in the program I managed, it was a big piece. So we look at a paradigm shift in goal planning where we can support someone to dream and create a vision before we move into setting outcomes focused on goals. I know in my program, sometimes I would get, when we get a referral, because I manage the referrals, goals would be already written out sometimes by the case manager that was working with the person, and it didn't necessarily come from the person themselves. So we wanted to address what we can do to support the person to dream and to come up with some new ideas that they want to work towards that comes from within. This is kind of what the goal plan looks like. It's kind of, I don't have too much time to go through it, but we want to look at like what are hopes and dreams, look at support someone to find a vision, what's important to you, what are some of your strengths, what are your resources, your toolbox, what are your, and then your goal goes in the corner. Who are the people supporting you? How do you want to feel? Why do you want this goal? And what do you think it's going to make you feel? And how can you actually choose to build that into your life on a daily basis so that you can feel that way every day? What are your barriers? And then action steps and celebrations built in. So that's what that looks like. And then module 14 is about building personal resilience. So when we're supporting others, we can sometimes put our well-being on the back burner. So in this module, we look at practices that support our own well-being that can prevent burnout. So creating wellness plans. We talk about RAP for those of you who are familiar with RAP. We talk about self-compassion, the act of giving the compassion we would give to other people to ourselves. And how do we just be kind to ourselves? We talk about mindfulness and protecting ourselves from re-traumatization. And then module 15 is family peer support. So all of the modules are applicable to family peer support, but in this one, we dig into topics that are specific to family peer support, specific needs and things that family peers would need in doing the work. And then the last module is working with youth and young adults. So we want to kind of explore the unique needs of youth and young adults and how we can meet those needs in our peer support work. So that's that. That's the training in a very quick way. So this is just a note that the training it's written in Creative Commons. So that means that you can take it and do different things with it. It's a different type of copyright than maybe other things you've come across. So that's what that means. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask me about that. You can email me. So this training will be released mid-July, like Jonathan said. So it's an online training, so people can go on and do it themselves. But it also can be delivered in person or over Zoom. So we've included on the website just a really simple facilitator guide for people who want to do it themselves. There's also a repository of other trainings on the website, and we're working on getting some way to do some micro certifications. That's in the works right now. And Jonathan is going to be running a community of practice. I'm not sure the details of that, but that will be happening. And I just finished, there's a few people on the call who were in that group. I just finished a pilot of the training with a group in Edmonton. We offered it in 18 sessions. So we took 2 months meeting twice a week. And there was still a lot of content that we didn't get through. So that it's a big training. And what you can do when if you did offer it, you can pick and choose what modules you think are important for your group to cover. So as of the time that the training is launched, there's not going to be a whole lot of extra support from the government, but there will be like a community of practice like Jonathan will be offering. And then I also, through my business, will be offering in-person and Zoom trainings. And then I'm planning to do a membership or a website, a group on my website that will offer extra resources for people who are going through it independently. And I'm looking at, if people are doing it independently, how can we kind of create cohorts for people? Because it's hard to go through all this stuff on your own without being able to talk to people about it and run ideas to past people. There's so many things that kind of challenge us. So we really want to create, I really want to create an opportunity to get people together if they can't get into an in-person training. And then I also want to work on at some point offering like a train the trainer, but I'm not quite there yet. And that's it for me.
Well, big thank you both. That was a whirlwind. Thank you both for a great presentation. I think this is very new, very innovative. So there's a lot to say and a lot to do and a lot to think about. If it's okay, maybe I'll just start with some of the questions that we can just pop through. So we have about 10 minutes, folks. And if people are not too hungry, I want to hang out, we'll hang out for another extra few moments if you're interested. But just Jane asked what are neurodivergent folks, and just for people, like if one person's asking, that means many people probably are asking, but it's just a term referring to people with differing cognitive abilities, and indeed it can include autism, but just maybe somebody has maybe somebody's had a car accident, or maybe somebody like myself is dyslexic and maybe thinks a little bit differently, or just it really implies a sort of a difference from maybe people who think in a typical kind of way. And so some people love to learn sort of with auditory stuff, others differently. So it really just is a term to try and capture that. Now, dear Susan asks us 2 questions, and she sends her regrets she had to go have a vaccine, but she talks about just this notion of self-determination. And at the time she posted the question, Jen, you hadn't gone through the self-determination part yet, but I'm just going to ask both questions and just open it for you. So yeah, she said, mental health peer workers are allowed to discuss with clients their own opposition to involuntary treatment for people who are profoundly psychotic. And I know that you provided a bit of an answer to that. Susan also has has a follow-up question. Would it be helpful for peers to learn basic information about the illness with which their clients are living? Peers often work with clients whose illnesses are very different than that of their own. And I think you kind of touched on that during the presentation, but just to bring that back and tidy that up a little bit.
Well, I can say that the training does not go into details about specific illnesses because this training is intense. Like I think with 16 modules, each module was about 30 to 50 pages. So but yet it's still an overview. It's still an intro. So we would expect, and there might be peers offering peer support services in a university or in, like different places. So we can't possibly include all the clinical information in there that would be needed. So we didn't go there, and we just said that each person needs to work on that with whoever's employing them. So if they're employed by like a health authority and they're put in a position where they're working in an inpatient unit, it's that health authority's responsibility to train them on that aspect, because this focuses on the relationship, it focuses on the core values and the standards of practice, not that kind of detail.
So I think that answer, thank you, Jen, kind of snuggles in with Jessie's a question as well. So she says, I'm an OT working community mental health team. I oversee hire peer support workers and contractors to support our clients. And she said, I hope this doesn't sound silly, but can the online training program replace the traditional way that peer support training has been offered to date? For example, in-person Zoom, practical hours and all that? Or is this meant to be an education tool to use in conjunction with the traditional peer support training?
My perspective is that it's a resource out there that you can use in whatever way you want to use. I have a bias. I'm going to say it. My bias is I really think a good learning happens in a group setting. So I would not recommend taking this and throwing out group work. You might be able to take some of this and add it into what you do in group work. But then also it's so great that we have this as a resource for someone who lives way up north or someone who doesn't have access to an in-person training. So I think that was the goal, that we wanted to create more accessibility for people, but it's not meant to take away what you're already doing, but you can take what we've given you and integrate it into what you already do if you want.
So I'm sorry, I feel like I'm pumping away at lots of these questions, but I'm just going to follow this with Robin's question. And Jonathan, I'm sure you have lots to add as well. But I think this is just all these four questions are super connected, I thought. So Robin adds, I love the philosophy behind this, and Jen and others involved have done an amazing job. Question is, seen on other online downloadable trainings, how do we know whether people actually get it, or if they do it by themselves, or if someone is using it to train others? How do we know that people with lived experience who have been involved in peer support themselves, which I think is critical, like other professional curriculum, how there was a US-based peer support worker program developed years ago that had people say that they had peer support training but weren't actually not that strong when they came out. They have also been attempts in other countries as well. But I guess the idea is, what's the oversight?
Yeah, and I don't know, Jonathan could probably speak to some of this too. And I think it goes back to, this is a resource. It's not meant to replace anything else that's out there. And I personally think that going through some kind of a process where people get to prove their learning is an important piece. So I personally think going through the online training, and not doing it in combination with something else. I think you're right, Robin, that, we don't know if someone will come out having grasped the concepts. So I think personally, as someone who is a trainer, I think there needs to be some parameters put in place that, certain people offer it and then give a certificate. Like if I offer a training, which I have done one and I've got a few other lined up, I will offer a training with a certificate. I do a quiz at the end. There's expectations that people have while we're in the training, and then they get a certificate from me that says that they've met the needs. So I think if someone just does the training, but hasn't done anything else in combination with anyone, if I was hiring the person, I'd ask a lot of questions.
Right.
I'll just say that.
I know we have 4 minutes left. I just want to honor Jane's point. So Jane is really supportive of, we need a lot of content. And she also says, I'm happy to see family included, very important. Clinicians and other professionals, they come and go in a person's life, but family is usually there forever. And maybe we just need a little bit more information about this one, Jane, but shame not to help and support them in their natural role. So maybe we want a little bit more, just a little bit more detail there, but just wanted to add Jane's voice there because she was very keen about the content, and I'm not sure if that intersects with the role of knowing about diagnosis and that issue. And I think you've spoken to that, Jenn. I feel, Jonathan, I just want to open it up for you. I hope I've honored people's questions here, but Jonathan, shoot.
Again, thank you so much to everyone on the call. Really, really great questions. I threw my email address in the chat there. And honestly, I know people say this all the time, but really reach out to me with any questions you have. Nicola has a really important point about cultural humility. So like really, really important point to me personally, but also to the overall curriculum. And I want to quickly address it, although it's a big topic. So one of the things we did is we've actually put our cultural humility module on hold, and we're in the process of rewriting it. And one of the things we're going to do is to address the things that Nicola points out right directly in there. We are actually working with some Indigenous folks to get a life application story written directly from their perspectives and have it translated into the original Indigenous language and embedded directly in the module. But I don't have enough time and space to get into the specifics here, but absolutely, we need to be very clear that that cultural humility term comes towards the white gaze. It's addressed at the colonial culture. Absolutely. It is not addressed inward to our BIPOC coworkers at all. That's not their job. And we will be very clear as we rewrite that module there. It's critically important stuff. So wanted to address that.
That's awesome. I think, please confirm, but the module is not live. So some people are saying, can we get access right now? Which is always a good thing, right? It's good when people want it, but we're not live yet, right? That's my understanding.
We aren't live yet. I think that maybe what I can do is I can probably get it available to everyone on this call probably earlier than the public launch, but it being a government thing, I do have to double check about that. So what I can commit to is asking that question of the ministry and seeing if we can get it to you folks earlier. I will also offer the invitation to attend the public launch. The drilling has started. So you'll have an opportunity to attend the launch yourselves as well. And we'll get you the website as soon as we can.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan. Very clear. This person, Andrea, asks about suggestions on how to find traditional peer support training, and I live in Kelowna. It's been hard to find any. Maybe you want to just reach out to Jenn. I think Jenn earlier on put a wee note in the website that might be. I'm just conscious that it's 11:59, and Andrea, I just want to honor your question there. And then somebody asks, is there any kind of a certificate offered by the online training, like a printable one at the end? And that's a yes from Jonathan. Any quizzes built in? I understand no quizzes, but yes to a certificate. Have I missed anything, Manny? Maybe have I? Go for it, Jonathan.
One very quick thing is the website. Once you see it, it's broken up into two learning journeys. One is an individual and one for facilitators supporting a group of peers going through the training. We use a learning management system. So if you opt into that, it will track your progress through the modules that will guide you towards completion and the printing of a certificate. In the background, Jenn and others are having conversations with post-secondary institutions to create a micro-credentialing process whereby this would be something like a food safe or a WHMIS certificate that would be widely recognized and accepted as a valuable credential.
Super. So I don't think I've honored this, but just to let you know that there's so many thank yous. If you haven't had a chance to see the chats and the questions and answers, so many people saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Great work, Jonathan. Great work, Jen. Great work, Jen. Great work, Jonathan. That is in there a million times and awesome. And thanks for the great work. And yeah. So Hazel did ask if we could have a list of attendees today. Honestly, Hazel, we don't have permission to do that. I'm so sorry. But we probably just need to keep that confidential. I'm sure you had good thoughts for that, but we probably can't do that. But we probably could, as Jonathan says, provide information to people after that. And Jen is the person who usually sends out those emails. So I'm sure we can get information to you as well. I was just thinking, my goodness, some of those like infographics kind of things that you have, I want to download them all and I want to print them. Just curious about permissions and citations. So just to make sure we honor your work. I know you have the artist on there, Jen, under every visual, but then I don't think we have a link to the project in general, and that might be helpful as well. Just so that just so that people can go back to the original source and know where it came from. That might
Well,
be.
we just haven't released it yet, so
Of
yeah,
course, we
but we
want
will.
that absolutely, yes. Well, as I was just thinking about some of the questions, I was wrestling a little bit with some of the changes or maybe some of the differences in the role of peer support. And probably we don't have a lot of time to go into that, but I think this module seems to be very focused on relational issues. And it's a little bit different maybe than other, at least where I've worked in mental health systems, where that is a bit more of a traditional kind of clinical model. And I think there's a wee bit of a difference there maybe, but maybe you want to speak to it just quickly before we scoot, or maybe not, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that I can speak to that a little bit. And what I'll do is I'm going to take off my project manager hat very quickly here and speak about my previous experience when I ran the peer services department at Rain City Housing. And this is only my experience, so I'm not, this is different for everyone. But I actually found, and I've learned a lot on this project, I found that the most amount of stigma and trauma that peer workers faced was when they were embedded in clinical teams that did not make clear that their value and their contribution and their expertise on that team was about that shared lived experience with the populations that team was meant to serve. And so what would happen is the peers themselves would feel ill at ease because they'd be, wanting to do charting or wanting to do all this complicated stuff. Not that they couldn't do it, but there are other people on that team that were there to do that. And so what I actually found was the more that you could emphasize and center that lived experience and its ability to punch through, reach people, and keep them connected to services, that's the superpower. That's the thing that makes them distinct and unique. And the more that teams can center that and make it as unique and as respected as the academic expertise employed by the rest of the team, the more successful that team is and the less stigmatizing and harmful it is for the peer.
Beautiful. Well, I know it's 12:04 and I want to honor people's time. I do see just from Robin, who says, how do we know about the facilitator of the training skills? LE skills, PSW skills. Not sure we're able to answer that. We might need a wee bit more detail, but you know what? I'm going to encourage you. How about reach out to Jonathan and Jen, and because it's 12:04, maybe we'll just do the right thing and say thank you. I mean, it's such a great problem having more questions than we have time to answer, and I just want to just say thanks to Jonathan for offering his contact details, and Jen as well with follow-up details. That might be great. Super good. Excellent. Thank you all very much. And yeah, so please give us a little bit of feedback. It's in the chat earlier on. So we'd love to hear what you thought about today's session. And we look forward to having you with Hazel. I'll just pop it back in the chat box again. But we look forward to having you, with Hazel in a couple of weeks. So please keep that top of mind. Yeah, and so fun. Look at that. Yes, so fun. Super. All right. So we wish you a happy lunch and we wish you well, for sure.
Oh, Nicole, just quickly, if you're still around, what's the difference between RAP and this? RAP is a program specifically for you, someone to take to work on your own wellness. This training it is about equipping people to work in a peer support role. So it's entirely different. A lot longer. It's more like a community worker, community support worker certificate. A lot longer, a lot more in depth. RAP is about supporting your own wellness, and then there is a facilitator training to offer it, but it's a lot simpler than this work. This work is, it's got a lot more modules and it's a lot more complex.